Hi, I'm Dr. Quincee Gideon. I'm a clinical psychologist that focuses on trauma and codependency, and today we're going to talk about people pleasing, the dreaded people pleasing. Click to subscribe and like this video, and let's get started. People pleasing is one of those main features in codependency. It's one of those easy things that we can pick out in a list of symptoms that someone might be experiencing when it comes to codependency. Why is it easy to pick out? Well, because there's a lot of rhetoric in our society around people pleasing. We hear it a lot in movies and shows and on the internet. And so it's given people a lot of context of what exactly this people pleasing thing is. But it's more than just anxiety about upsetting someone. It's rooted in something much deeper than that. The main feeling behind people pleasing is anxiety. But the question really is, what exactly are we anxious about? The first thing that we're anxious about is being liked. We are so afraid of being unliked and being judged harshly for something that we've done. In fact, because of that, we jump in a lot of the time to keep other people happy so that maybe they won't reject us, leave us alone, abandon us, or make us feel unliked or judged. One step deeper than that is also the anxiety of being fundamentally unlovable. We are so afraid that if we were to show up as our full selves and really be seen by someone else, we would be found fundamentally unlovable, and that's too uncomfortable for us. So what do? We jump in, we start keeping people happy, we start looking at all of their mood states in an attempt to understand, and then of course mitigate any of those negative feeling states that they might have towards us, which of course helps us temporarily feel like, we've survived another day without feeling like we're going to be rejected for being unlovable. The third big anxiety that most people are feeling when they're in a people-pleasing or a codependent pattern is that they're feeling like if they were to show up as more of their true selves, they would be too needy or too much. You might hear people talk about that, where if they were to show up and to really tell you how they feel, or if they ask for some of their needs to be met, they feel as if they're taking up too much space in a relationship. So what do if they feel like showing up as their full selves is too much and it will chase people away? Well, they move into people pleasing. They keep people happy so that they don't have to feel that very fundamental fear that comes up in the anxiety behind people pleasing. So what exactly does this anxiety feel like? Well, first of all, it can feel like rumination. Do you know what rumination is? It is the obsessive thought pattern where you feel like you're spiraling because you can't stop thinking about the thing that you're anxious about. One of the ways that this shows up in people pleasing is the email example that I gave you earlier. Someone sends an email, they end that sentence with a period instead of an exclamation mark. They don't put very many words in it that make you feel like they're really reassuring you of how they feel about you, and suddenly your entire day is really ruled by the thoughts of anxiety of why this happened. Why did they send that way? Why do they feel that way? What does it mean? What are they going to say to me whenever I see them at work tomorrow? This can even move into nighttime rumination, where you have a hard time sleeping because you're preoccupied with what the meaning was behind someone's text, their email, or whatever communication that they have sent. This anxiety can also feel like preoccupation with other people's feelings. It starts to feel like a big anxious bubble that you live in all of the time, because if there's the threat of someone feeling anything negative, you have somehow not done your job of keeping them happy. That is the primary way in which people pleasing shows up. So what do? You step into these spaces of fixing and pleasing and never telling anyone no and never holding a boundary, because if you did, they might have some feelings about that and you feel like you can't allow that to happen. Bad things happen when other people are free to feel exactly the way that they feel. This anxiety can also feel like difficulty moving on without repeated reassurance. So if you're in a space where you are needing a lot of reassurance from your support group, from the people that are in charge of you, from your mentors, from your partnerships, then you are likely in a pretty entrenched people-pleasing habit. You need people to tell you that you're doing okay, that you've done a good enough job of keeping them happy. Do you see how this leads to a lot of exhaustion and burnout? And the last way that this anxiety shows up for a people pleaser is excessive worry about the status of your relationships. And this can happen with bosses, in workplaces, in your romantic relationships, with your family of origin, with your children. If anyone gives you any sort of indication that they're somehow not okay with you, then this can create a lot of anxiety, and you end up spending most of your time worrying about the status of your relationships. Are we doing okay? Are they about to be mad at me? Are they about to leave because they have feelings about me? So we've established that people pleasing is deeply rooted in anxiety. So what do we do with that anxiety? Well, the compulsion is to completely alleviate that anxiety by responding quickly, by moving into action, by soothing someone, accommodating their needs, reassuring them, seeking reassurance, doing whatever we need to do in order to alleviate that anxiety as quickly as possible. But moving really quickly into alleviating that anxiety actually shortchanges you, because now you're pulled into a codependent pattern where your needs are neglected. You don't actually know fully how you feel. All you know is that you feel a whole lot of anxiety, and that's no way to live. And you're robbing yourself of having the opportunity to really connect with people in a meaningful way. You've got to be known in order to have these intimate relationships. If you're chronically people-pleasing, it's going to be hard for people to know how you actually feel and see the world. Let's end with talking a little bit about triggers for people pleasing. The first trigger is when you feel like someone is mad at you. Ugh, that leaves you with all kinds of anxiety. It changes the whole dynamic of your day. You spend most of the day worrying about how you're going to fix that. Yeah, people being mad at you, big time trigger. The second one is someone sounding short on email or text. Whether that's a period versus an exclamation mark, or if it's just that someone did not spend a lot of time being very verbose with you, you might interpret that as they're mad at me, they're upset, I've overstepped my boundaries, I've needed too much. You see how this goes back to those primary anxieties? A third trigger is passive aggression from people. If you feel a tinge of guilt, or passive aggression from someone else, that can really send you into a tailspin of people pleasing. It starts that process of you jumping in to fix it, help them feel differently, help them feel better, so that of course they stop being passive aggressive with you. Another trigger is that you're worried about some future difficulties. So if you've had 1 or 2 big blow-ups in a relationship, what that does sometimes is it teaches you what not to do if you want to have a very calm, non-chaotic relational dynamic. Of course, someone in a people-pleasing or a codependent stance is really gonna want that. They're gonna want to avoid all things chaotic, right? So if you have had a really negative interaction in one of your relationships, then that can lead you to chronically people-pleasing here in the current in order to avoid future difficulties in that same relationship. Another trigger is that you're worried about offending someone. So this means that internally you've made a very long list of ways that you might offend someone, and you are chronically trying to avoid all landmines in relationships. Again, your goal in people pleasing is to reduce any sort of negative feelings towards you. And so you're going to do a lot of worrying and ruminating and planning in order to avoid that. And that ignites all of those people pleasing tendencies. Another trigger is someone being angry over anything. They can be mad about traffic. They can be mad that a package wasn't delivered. They can be mad about an email that they got from their boss. But if they are mad in your orbit, then you suddenly move into a lot of those people-pleasing tendencies. Again, you're trying to avoid a lot of discomfort, and you're trying to keep them calm so that the relationship stays intact. Another trigger is tension and intensity in the relationship. Whatever that tension or intensity is, whether it's personality, whether it's a relational dynamic, whether it's a circumstance that's come up in life, any sort of tension that happens in a relationship can trigger that people-pleasing tendency. And then, of course, there's the threats of withdrawal. That can also be a huge trigger for people pleasing. If there's some threat that if you do something or say something that is unsavory to the person around you and they're going to withdraw or punish you, that can move you quickly into those people pleasing tendencies, which starts all of those codependent patterns all over again. And last but not least, the feeling of being punished. This goes back to childhood and feeling that if you were a kid that took up space and had feelings and needed things that got in the way of whatever was happening with your parents or your caregivers, then you were typically punished for that, right? There was some sort of withdrawal, or you were being ignored, or you were actively punished. If you are in a relationship dynamic where you feel like you're being punished for being you or taking up more space or having needs, then that is definitely going to ignite those people-pleasing tendencies. I hope that was helpful. Subscribe to our channel so that you can learn all things trauma, codependency, the brain, the body, and how we heal.